Hey Stranger Things fans, bored now, back with you on this video. I return to the Upside Down, I return to the Mall of America, and I return to Stranger Things 3. So this is chapter 2 of season 3. It is called The Mallrats. Yeah, decent title, I'm sort of down with that, although just for technicality's sakes, Mallrats was actually a 90s film, not an 80s film. But I'll forgive them. It was understandable that they went there for the title. And there's plenty going on in the mall in this episode with the various characters, so I'll talk about that. But first of all, I'll say full spoilers and I'll dive into the Billy plot and what transpires with that from the fallout of the cliffhanger of the last episode. Now, he does survive, or seems to survive, the monster or alien, whatever it is, the creature. He escapes the barn, drives away, and we then start to see him flashing back to what happened in the barn, and we see that he's had some sort of a possession, and we cut to this scene of him being confronted by a group of people. He screams at them, "What do you want?" And out walks the leader, which looks just like him. So you've got to think there's some alien shit going on there. And throughout the episode, as Billy goes about his day-to-day stuff, his job as a lifeguard, we see then old Billy boy, even by his standards, isn't quite right in the head. He's clearly shaken from the whole incident, and it becomes clear later on that he has been possessed by the shadow demon who possessed Will in the previous season. So Billy is being controlled by the shadow monster, and he's edgy throughout the episode, and what it leads to in the end is he actually kidnaps a girl, like one of the lifeguards from the swimming pool, and actually takes her to the barn at the end of the episode. And it seems like he's about to sacrifice her, then he's about to give her over, feed her to whatever you want to say, to whatever this thing is. So that's again the end of the episode. So that's what's happening with Billy so far. So he is still alive, although he's sort of possessed by this thing. And we're not quite sure how much remains of Billy. Now, switching over to some different stuff, because the Mallrats of the title is because there's sort of like a fight between Al and Mike, and it's because Mike, under pressure from Hopper, decides then to give Al like an excuse why he can't see her, and he says that whole thing about his grandmother being ill in the hospital, and yeah, she's obviously very confused and upset and kind of suspects that then he is lying. And it's a funny scene because he's like cutting back and forth and shouting at his mum not to listen in, and he's sort of trying to hide it. But there's some good stuff between him and Karen. But yeah, because of this, Al goes to Max, and we then cut between the two groups, because obviously Mike goes to Lucas and to Will, and we see the different advice where Lucas, who we find out has been dumped like 5 times by Max, which is pretty funny, and he claims, I keep coming back and winning her back, which who knows if that's true or if that's just bravado. But anyway, he gives Mike the advice of going to the mall to buy Al a nice present, and little do they know, Al is at the mall herself, because when she goes to Max basically gives it to her very straight in the sort of way that Max does, where she says, because Al uses the term friends don't lie, and Max is like, yeah, well, boyfriends too do. He's an asshole. And she suggests the perfect way to get over him is, let's go on a shopping spree to the mall. And you know what? I've got to agree with Max in this case. So they go to the mall, and what's good about the build up to them going is that Al actually mentions then this isn't right. This is sort of against the rules, and I like that they're keeping that consistency of Elle can only go out at certain times, she can only go to certain places, and you have to limit how much she's out in public. But obviously the point of the scene is then they're being kind of out there and rebellious, so Max is like, no, screw it, screw the rules, and she talks Elle into it. And another thing that's like notable is it's Elle's first ever time shopping, which makes sense. So they go shopping, Elle's first time shopping, and again, Millie Bobby Brown's acting in this scene is brilliant, because I don't know, just how sort of dazzled and confused at the whole experience she is so well conveyed through her like facial expressions and body reactions, and it's a really good piece of acting, really. But they go on this wild shopping spree where they dress up, because Max just says, you've never been shopping, so in that case we'll just go everywhere. So they dress up in a bunch of stores. It's like this really slick, almost 80s style montage where Material Girl by Madonna, a perfect piece of music for the montage, is used. And they get up to various things. They go and get ice cream at the Ahoy parlour. There's various stuff that they're doing. They sort of get back at the bullies at one point, because there's a group of girls who are like turning their noses up. There's also like a clever thing where Elle is like trying on heels for the first time, and she sort of like stumbles, and that's when the bully's like, look. But that's when Max or Elle, sorry, pulls the prank on her, using her powers to make their like soda container like go everywhere, and they laugh. So it's a really fun scene, and it's intercut with the boys looking around for a present. Will just wants to play Dungeons and Dragons, but Lucas has this idea, let's go and buy her something really nice to make things up. I have to say, pretty sound advice from Lucas as well, but they're sort of struggling to find the right gift, but also to find something in their price range, because at one point they pick out a really nice bit of jewelry, but it turns out that then it's $300, so that's that out. But just these sequences and the way they're intercut, it's a really slick bit of direction, which shows you how sort of on the game the directors and the production of this show is. And of course it all leads to them bumping into each other like later in the car park. And what I like here is how pissed Mike is at Max, how he's like criticizing her, Elle can't be here and stuff. And obviously like Max stands up for Elle, and it's one of those things where I think Mike's concern is genuine. I don't think it's just that he's like jealous. I think he's making the legitimate point, but at the same time it's sort of not the point of the scene. The point is, and you're sort of with Elle on this, and although she does actually go one step further, because she calls him out on being a liar, and for a minute I thought she was gonna like dump her ice cream cone over him, which would have been a waste, of course. But no, in the end she actually dumps him, and we get that Cold of Ice music. Yeah, she dumps him there on the spot, which is really harsh in a way, but you sort of understand it, and they go off on the bus laughing. So really good episode for Elle and for Max. I really enjoyed this combination together, and it sort of pays something off, because if you remember in season 2 they had a bit of a frosty introduction, and Elle was very standoff with Max when they first met. So this is a good like payoff to that stuff. Then they actually come together for this fun sort of sequence. We get further development with the whole Russian scientist in this episode, and that's because Dustin actually goes to Steve to tell him about what's been going on, and it's the first time they've seen each other since Dustin got back, because he wasn't back during that previous scene in the first episode. And I love that the bromance is back and it's alive again, and their whole like nerdy greeting that they both do like a Jedi type sword movement at one point, which is just brilliant. And I like this. I like how Steve has become like this friend and sounding board to Dustin, and how Dustin tells him about his summer, and they bring up the whole Dustin claiming that Susie is better looking than Phoebe Cates thing from the first episode, which is really good. But yeah, Steve is legitimately there and cool for Dustin, because Dustin is like telling him about how he feels like really cut adrift and left out now because of the way his friends were. And Steve's like, oh no, those dicks, or whatever the term he uses. But it's really good stuff. And Robin has some good inserts in the scene, because when Dustin comes around, she's like, well, how many kids do you know, Harrington? Which is really funny. But no, we get a nice little trio with these three characters in the episode, because Dustin mentions to Steve about the Russian transmission he intercepted, and he actually, because at one point he's trying to whisper it under his breath, obviously trying to be subtle about it, and Steve says, oh, why don't you just speak up? And that's when Dustin screams out and is like, oh yeah, that's what I thought you said. And what this leads to is them trying to decode the Russian thing in the back of the Ahoy parlour, and Robin actually gets involved because it turns out she knows several languages, and she starts decoding it for them, and all they get to is then they work out like a code, which they were obviously saying, and it's something to do with like a silver horse. And it's a good moment for Steve, actually, because when they're wondering about the mall later on, he actually has this idea where he looks over and he sees like one of those, like, you know, sort of toys that then children go on, like, and it's like a silver horse sort of thing, like you put money in it and it goes up and down like a ride type thing. And he sees it, and he puts like quarters in it, and he figures out that it's actually playing the same tune, like to the message sort of thing of the code. And so he figures out then the message, the transition actually came from in America, not from Russia as they initially thought. So good stuff with them. I enjoyed them stuff, and this plot is slowly bubbling. Not too much to it, but Joyce has sort of been drawn into it because there's been certain electrical like faults sort of at her store in her area. Like there's some stuff with magnets, so she actually goes to Mr. Clark, which is glorious. So she actually blows off the date she's supposed to have with Hopper, because he's finally worn her down in this episode. Now he's way too happy at what happened with Mike and Al than his sort of tactics actually paid off, and he goes jogging along singing away. He's got the you don't spit into the wind song playing on the stereo, which he played in a previous episode in season 2 with Al, I think. So that's another clever little callback. But yeah, he's way too excited, and he eventually leaves out some details with Joyce, but he does talk her into like having a date with him, and he goes to this fancy restaurant, and it's obvious she's not going to come, so he causes a scene. But yeah, Joyce is too busy with Mr. Clark getting like information and background about possibilities to this whole like electrical surge, and he gives her like some credible scientific like answers, but she comes to the conclusion that then it could be more. And speaking of that, Jonathan and Nancy do some Mulder and Scully in this episode, because they come up with excuses to leave the newspaper, the office. Nancy claims, oh, I've got to go to the doctor's, woman's problems, and again she's calling out the sort of bullshit sexism of the people she works for. But no, they both use it as an excuse to sneak away at lunch, and they actually go to the woman who called in the information about the rats, and oh yeah, I just got more rats double meaning as well. That's kind of genius. But yeah, they go and see the woman, and she tells them what happened, and she actually says there's one still alive, and yeah, she shows them the rats, and Jonathan takes some photos. But Nancy gets another lead. She does something in the phone book and comes up with another lead. So she calls Jonathan away, and then we get the rat going crazy, because the rat is already bouncing about the cage. So he just goes, or it, I should say, just goes crazy and explodes. But it then sort of the goo, if you for want of a better word, the goo reassembles and actually crawls out of the cage. It's a really good practical effect, so it's sort of on its way to somewhere. Maybe drawn to the barn would be my guess. So that's Stranger Things and More Rats. A really enjoyable episode. Some strong stuff really with all the characters. So that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I am, of course, building up to the new season of Stranger Things in May, so I'm going to continue. Probably 2 a week of these episodes from season 3. But as I said, let me know your thoughts. Like and subscribe as always. Share me out on social media, and I'll be back with more Stranger Things soon. Thanks for listening.